we're seeing congressmen across the country having, these town halls that they're being run out of. We're seeing incredible heat from their constituents. We're seeing a lot of unhappiness due to the direct economic impact, obviously negative impact from the moves out of the White House and from this new Doge department. And, they're barely hanging on, but, these congressmen are pretty confident that as long as they have Donald Trump's election, their jobs are secure next November. And taking this seat, this type of flip is going to let them all know that there is no job security from Donald Trump's endorsement, that you must be responsible to your constituents. You must be serving and representing them, not your party and not Donald Trump.
Welcome to Deep Dive with me, Sean C. Fettig. In a critical moment for American democracy, there will be 5 special elections for House seats in the near future, and if Democrats win them all, they can take control of the House from Republicans. 2 of those elections are happening in Florida on Tuesday, April 1st, and they've drawn national attention due to their potential to shift the political landscape and provide a check on President Donald Trump's administration. Democratic victories in both Florida races in April, and then taking the remaining 3, election dates TBD, 2 of which are locks for Democrats, the shift in the House would significantly hobble the ability of the Republican-controlled Congress to advance Trump's agenda, undercutting his single-minded focus on dismantling American democracy. My guest today is one of those candidates. Josh Weil is a public school teacher, single father, and the Democrat running in Florida's 6th district. Weil's campaign focuses on education funding, inflation relief, and representing the interests of all constituents regardless of their party. Josh and I talk about the shape that Trump's America is taking, the stakes in this election, his vision for the Democratic Party and for American democracy, if Chuck Schumer is the leader in the Senate that Democrats need, and what it takes to win over Trump voters. All right, if you like this episode or any episode, please give it a like, share, and follow on your favorite podcast platform, and or subscribe to the podcast on YouTube. And as always, if you have any thoughts, questions, or comments, please feel free to email me at deepdivewithsean@gmail.com. Let's do a deep dive. Josh, thanks for being here. How are you?
Great. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So, how much sleep are you getting these days?
Sleep. We'll sleep in April.
Yeah. Okay. Fair enough. So I don't want to overstate this, but it truly is a fact that the special election in Florida's 6th on April 1st is one of the most important elections in our lifetime. And while this seat, which is vacated by Republican Mike Waltz, and the other Florida special election that'll be held on the 1st in Florida's 1st, which was vacated by Matt Gaetz, probably a name a lot of listeners know, won't offer the opportunity for Democrats to flip the House, but wins for Democrats in these 2 elections could narrow the margin to literally a 1-seat majority for Republicans. And I'm sure you're already hearing this, that your election may be an early bellwether of the country's initial feelings about the Trump presidency. How do you feel about this characterization, and what are the stakes in this election?
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. We had an opportunity to take back the House, but unfortunately, due to the untimely passing earlier this month of 2 representatives, Sylvester Taylor and Raul Grijalva, we're 2 seats further back. Those special elections in very safe blue districts over the summer will, depending on what happens here on April 1st, can and will take back the House this year. We also have 1 more later in New York. But yeah, it's the tightest margin that any majority party has ever had in the history of our nation. And I really think that these are even more than just being about closing that margin or taking the House right now. We're about to flip a seat that went to the Republican by 32 points in November. And that type of unprecedented turnaround is going to send a resounding call across the nation, particularly to Republican electeds. We're seeing congressmen across the country having, these town halls that they're being run out of. We're seeing incredible heat from their constituents. We're seeing a lot of unhappiness due to the direct economic impact, obviously negative impact from the moves out of the White House and from this new Doge department. And, they're barely hanging on, but, these congressmen are pretty confident that as long as they have Donald Trump's election, their jobs are secure next November. And taking this seat, this type of flip is going to let them all know that there is no job security from Donald Trump's endorsement, that you must be responsible to your constituents. You must be serving and representing them, not your party and not Donald Trump. And I think that's going to change everything in the House over these next 2 years.
So this election is going to play out in a very different landscape than the one in November. And that does suggest that the way that representatives, and I'm much more concerned about how Democrats run for office, it's going to change how you would run now than you would have maybe perhaps last November, in which Republicans ended up securing control of both houses of Congress, again, as you mentioned, in the House with a very slim margin, and also the presidency. So how are you running your campaign that captures the moment that we're living through now that might be different than how you would have run for the seat in November of last year?
Well, anyone running last November, was part of a much bigger ticket, right? You were part of, the main race was Donald Trump versus Kamala Harris. That was driving voter turnout. That was driving perception on which party people wanted in power, particularly when you're looking at independent and MPA voters. Right now, there is no other name on the ballot, right? It's going to be me or Randy Fine. People are choosing based on a lot more than just their parties. We have a candidate in my Republican opponent who is committed to running to serve Donald Trump, whereas I am running to serve the people. We have, a whole new presidential administration. And for a lot of people here, even if they voted for Donald Trump, even if they supported Donald Trump, wanting to ensure that their local needs are considered, that there is, if you think that Donald Trump's policies are best for the nation, do you have and do you need someone here making sure that they are voting for what is best for you? Because they want both things, right? Mm-hmm. It's not wholesale. Just because something is best overall for the country, if you believe that, doesn't mean that it's best for people in Palatka, doesn't mean that it's best for people in Daytona, doesn't mean that it's best for people in Palm Coast. So there's a lot of that. There's also, early unhappiness. People were voting for change based on where we were economically after 4 years under Joe Biden. Normally you would say that, well, we haven't even been out of Trump's first 100 days. How much could he have done? Mm-hmm. But I mean, he's done more in these last 2 months than some presidents did in their entire 4 years. Mm-hmm. There's a lot to go off of, and there's been a lot of immediate direct impact. So, we get to run a race that's really about character and values. We get to run a race that is, more solely focused on us as the two candidates without an up or down ballot driving people or swaying people. There isn't a ticket here that people are choosing and voting for. And in addition, we really get to run and handle this thing. This is our campaign and we are driving it on the ground. We're making sure that we have an incredible field team out there. We're making sure that, we're not relying on television, although we're on television, mm-hmm. but we're relying on real face-to-face contact with voters. We're relying on real conversations, voters having the opportunity to speak to someone, look them in the eyes, and know that this is real. We're not just sending them messages over the TV. And that's a big difference. We're playing, this is a ground game and we're running on progressive values as well. We're running on progressive policies that, when there's a lot more people involved and it's a larger party platform that you don't get the opportunity to really focus on. And we've been told from the national party and from national media that progressive policies don't play in districts like this. Mm-hmm. And we have an opportunity to really show how wrong that is. We have an opportunity to make a huge victory as a progressive in a place where people didn't think it was possible, that can really help redefine how the Democratic Party messages itself moving forward.
One of the narratives about the election results last November is that Democrats have failed in speaking to the public, to really grasping concerns of the average American, and also that one of the strategies that was employed by Democrats is that the election was an existential battle between authoritarianism and democracy, and that in retrospect, that just didn't really land with the public. And yet here we are, as you've mentioned, in a period of time in which that threat actually, it's a bit more tangible now. So if a candidate like yourself were to cast a campaign or an election in that same light now, that might carry more weight than it did in November. But I don't want to spend too much time retrospectively dissecting this because it doesn't really matter to your campaign. But I do think it does inform maybe a proactive approach. So I guess I'm just wondering very quickly, do you agree that we are in an existential moment now between authoritarianism and democracy? And how do you explain that election outcome?
We absolutely are. And, messaging is a huge part of it. Democrats have failed in messaging in a major way over the past 10, 15 years. And this is something that I speak about when we're out in public and I talk to voters, and whether it's Republicans or Democrats. I mean, the fact that you're putting it as, that last November was between authoritarian and democracy, many Republican voters felt like they were voting for democracy over authoritarianism when they chose Donald Trump. Mm-hmm. And now they are seeing something completely opposite. Although this was telegraphed months ahead, right? There was no surprise in Project 2025. All of this was out there well before the election. And that really comes down to messaging then. They were able to convince people that what they were seeing wasn't real. And we weren't able to convince people that reality was real. One of the examples I like to use is, when we talk about labor, we've failed in messaging on labor so badly for so long. If you go out to any voter in the country, regardless of what party or how they lean, right, and you say to them, all right, we have two major parties in this country. One of them is the party that is most closely tied to big corporations and billionaires. And one of them is the party that's most closely tied to labor unions. Which is which? It doesn't matter if they're Republican, Democrat, or independent. They're going to know which ones you're talking about. And yet, working people across this country go into the voting polls. And even if they know that, they know which party is supported by labor unions. They know which party is supported by corporations and billionaires. Mm-hmm. They still go in feeling, too many of them, feeling that the Republican Party is the one with their best interest in mind. And we need them to feel that Democrats are the ones for the working people, that we are the party of the working people, that we are the party of labor. And that's messaging. And the fact that we had 2 whole years of a Biden-controlled White House with a Democratic majority in the Senate and the House, and we did not pass the PRO Act, mm-hmm. Which would have been one of the strongest labor bills that has come through, one of the strongest federal legislation for labor and workers in decades, is there's no one to blame but ourselves. We had the power and we didn't use it in ways that we're seeing the Republicans use it right now when they have the exact same level of power.
So another narrative is that Democrats are in the wilderness right now. And I think a really good example, a recent example, is how the vote for the continuing resolution, this CR, played out last week that avoided a shutdown, but it exposed a rift between at least House and Senate Democrats, and particularly Minority Leader Chuck Schumer, who's taking a lot of heat right now.
As he should.
Okay, well, I guess that kind of speaks to the question, which is how can Democrats and how are you then reaching out to disaffected voters that might be more effective than the strategy that Democrats employed in last year's election? And what do you think Democrats can and should be doing right now to win elections?
Look, if the Republicans, as we just mentioned, have control of the House, the Senate, and the White House, There are very few times or opportunities where they need any votes from the Democrats. Okay? They are operating from a position of absolute power. When they have absolute power, they have no need to negotiate. On those rare moments when they require Democratic votes, we have to bring them to the table to negotiate with us. They have to negotiate and make concessions for our votes. The fact that they refuse to, and our Democratic leadership in the Senate still caved, was unacceptable. Unacceptable. You cannot be allowing them in those rare moments when they need you to have you for free. That's not how any of this works. And someone pointed it out online that it appears that Republicans' biggest concern is what Republican voters think about their actions, and that Democrats' biggest concerns is what Republican voters think about their actions. And it's hard to argue with that. We need to serve all Americans, and we need to start by ensuring that we are not betraying our base, because losing our base is how we lose big elections like last November. Mm-hmm. You have to secure your base and expand from there. And leadership is just not doing that right now.
So this is maybe just an observation and a little bit of inside baseball, but I think one of the things that was particularly shocking is that it just didn't have to be a zero-sum game, the continuing resolution. There really was an opportunity for Democrats to at least negotiate some concessions, and it doesn't seem like that happened at all. So what do you think happened? I mean, you're running for a seat in the House, and the House held the line, right? It was the Senate that kind of broke. Mm-hmm. But what do you think happened there, and what's the potential ramifications of it?
I mean, look, I think that we do not have strong leadership in the Senate. And I think we have an abundance of evidence at this point that it's true. When Chuck Schumer took over as majority leader, he came in criticizing Mitch McConnell for all of the Democratic-sponsored bills that never made it off of his desk and never got introduced or up for vote, because McConnell had control over that. But then Chuck Schumer never introduced those same bills as well. We've seen it from Nancy Pelosi. Whether you love her or hate her, Nancy Pelosi is very good at her job. Nancy Pelosi makes sure that she got done everything she needed to get done. Whether we liked all of those things or not, if she needed to get them done, she got them done. And there is no one out there who feels that way about Chuck Schumer as our leader in the Senate, which is a problem. It's not to say that he hasn't been a successful senator. It's not to say that he doesn't have good values, but he has been ineffective in the top leadership position in the most powerful legislative body in the world. And we can't abide that any longer. The stakes are too high right now for us to continue to sit back with ineffective leadership, completely missing on major opportunities like the ones we just highlighted.
So final question, and one I'm sure you've never gotten before. Why should folks in your district vote for you, and what can your district expect from you if you are elected to represent them in Congress in April?
So the way I like to put it is, I'm a public school teacher. I've spent 13 years working in Title I schools. In public schools, we don't choose which kids we serve, right? We don't just serve the easy ones. We don't just serve the ones that are like us. I come from a math and science background. Working in school leadership the last 3 years, we don't just make sure that our math and science scores are good and ignore reading and social studies scores. We work for everything, every kid, every family. We make sure that they're taken care of, that their needs are met, that they're getting everything they can out of our school. And that's exactly the type of philosophy and mindset that we should have from our elected leaders. Now, I'm not here to serve party leadership. I'm not here to hold the line on party line on a vote or an issue, if it's in contrast to what is best for my district here. I'm here to represent the people of District 6. And you know what? Sometimes that's going to mean voting for or supporting legislation brought about by the Republicans. And, I feel confident that far more often they'll be best served by what we're doing out of the Democratic Party. But I'm here to serve them. And that's how it should be. I think that we need more representatives who are serving their constituents than we do ones serving their party.
Josh, thanks for taking the time. For the sake of the country, good luck.
Thank you so much.
It's clear that the upcoming special elections in Florida's 1st and 6th districts are more than just local races. They're potential game changers for the entire nation. With the balance of power in the House hanging by a thread, literally every vote counts. These elections could be the key to restoring checks and balances in our government and safeguarding our democratic institutions. And my discussion with Josh Weil should make starkly clear why these elections in Florida on April 1st could be the most important elections in American history. To our listeners in Florida's 1st and 6th districts, your vote has never been more important. So make your voice heard on April 1st. There are some links in the show notes with information about how to vote in these districts. And for all of our listeners inside and outside of Florida, there are also some links to the candidate websites, including Josh Weil's, of course, if you want to support, donating money, spreading the message, getting out the vote, however you want to get involved to take back the House, and with it, American democracy. All right, check back next week for another episode of Deep Dive. Chat soon, folks.